welcome to Fish on Fridays. I'm Al McCauley. If you tuned into last week's episode, I talked a little bit about the sacred order or the hierarchy of the Catholic Church because I get asked that question quite a bit. You know, who's in charge, where, who's after the Pope and all that kind of stuff. And we talked about the different offices, if you will, within the church. If you didn't have a chance to check that episode out, you can go back to our Facebook page or to YouTube page, Fish on Fridays with Al, and take a look at it. It's good viewing. I'm a little biased, but it's good viewing. Today, what I want to do is follow up a little bit about that and talk specifically about the office of the Pope. And I don't want to talk about the man, Pope Francis, for instance, so much as I want to talk about the origins of it. I'm a church history guy. I love history, and so that's kind of what I want to talk about. Our tradition in the Catholic Church says that the first pope was a guy named St. Peter. And this goes back, there's a lot of different places in the scripture, in the New Testament, that talk about the primacy or the importance of Peter. But there's one place in particular in the New Testament that we call the Petrine Text. Petrine Text. And it's Matthew's Gospel, chapter 16. And Jesus is hobnobbing with his buddies, with his disciples in the northern part of Israel in a place called Caesarea Philippi. And he asks the question, what are people saying about me? And they give him all kinds of answers. Well, they think you're one of the prophets like Jeremiah or Elijah. Some people think you're John the Baptist. And then Jesus asks the question that I would submit he asks all of us down through the ages. And that question is, who do you say that I am? As Christians, just as an aside, as Christians, we always should ask ourselves that question. Who do I say Jesus is in my life? Is that relationship where I want it to be? But he put that question to his followers, the people who had been living with them, who have been listening to him preach, who have been watching him perform these miracles. And so he asked them, well, what do you say about me? Who do you think that I am? What do you say? And Simon says, well, you're the Christ, you're the Messiah. And so Jesus does a lot here in the verses. And again, chapter 16 of Matthew's Gospel, Jesus says, you're blessed because you don't know this because of your own accord, but my Father has revealed it to you. So there's a supernatural element to this. Peter is made aware of this reality of Christ, of Jesus being the Christ, of the anointed one, the Messiah, because this has been graced or given to him by God. And so that knowledge is of divine origin. But he says, because you said this, Peter, I'm going to change your name from Simon to Peter, which means rock. And on this rock, I will build my church. Now, that's an important line. We're going to get to it. I'm going to put it in the back burner. We'll get back to it later. But he says, on this rock, on you, the rock, I will build my church. And then Jesus goes on and says, I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. What you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. What you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Now, I could be wrong because I wasn't there 2,000 years ago, but I have to assume Jesus meant the key thing a little metaphorically. I don't think he pulled out of his pocket a set of car keys or house keys and actually gave him keys to the kingdom of heaven. And as an aside, by the way, if you've ever heard a good joke about somebody dying and going to the pearly gates and they're met by St. Peter, that's why. It's because Jesus gave him the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And that's why St. Peter always meets people at the pearly gates in those great jokes. But anyway, when he gives Peter the keys, what he's really saying is, I give you trust. I give you responsibility. Don't mess this up. You're in charge. You have authority. You have power. You have responsibility. When my wife and I would go on vacation when our kids were younger, even still today, if we were to leave town for a few days or for a week, we would give our neighbors, Mike and Blanca, the keys to our house and ask them, bring in the mail. Can you water the plants and just make sure everything's fine? What we're really doing when we give them the keys is we're giving them power. We're giving them authority over our house and all of its contents. And ultimately, we're giving them responsibility and trust. That when we come back home, it'll be the way we really want it, and it'll have been taken care of. And so that's what Jesus is doing to Peter. He's basically saying, this is yours, I entrust this to you. And we as Catholics believe that authority did not just die with Peter, that it's passed on subsequently to every other pope down through history. Now, here's a great trivia question you can wow your family and friends with. If everybody realizes that Peter is the first pope, the great question is, who's the second pope? And the answer is Linus. Not to be confused with Charlie Brown's good friend who likes his blanket, but Pope Linus is the second pope. If you take Peter as the first pope all the way to Pope Francis is pope number 266. In 2,000 years, we've had that unbroken line of 266 men who have been popes. Now let's get back to this a little bit. I told you there was something I was going to kind of bring off the back burner. Jesus says to Peter, you are rock. That's what your name means. Petros means rock. And on this rock, I will build my church. That is significant because Peter is going to be killed. He's going to be crucified. And tradition tells us he was crucified upside down in the year 64 AD. If you don't know the story, he was crucified upside down because when he was arrested and taken out to be executed, he told his executioners, I'm not worthy to die the way Jesus did. And so they turned him upside down instead of crucifying him in the same way that Christ was killed. So Peter was crucified upside down. He was taken down from the cross and he was buried in Rome. That's where he was killed, was in Rome. So he was buried there. 6 short years later, near 70 AD, Rome sends legions of men down to the Holy Lands, down to Jerusalem, and pancakes it, just flattens it, destroys the temple. There's no place for Christians to go now, and so they're scattered. And they need a place to call home, if you will, a headquarters. And so what they do is they remember this gospel passage, this Matthew 16, when Jesus says, Peter, you are the rock, and on this rock I'll build my church. And they remember that Peter was killed and buried in Rome. So they decided to say, Rome will be our headquarters. From now on, we will be based literally on the body of the rock of St. Peter. And that will be our home, if you will. That is why the church is built on Rome. That is why we are called Roman Catholics, because we are literally headquartered over the body of the Apostle Peter. Now, if you've been to Rome and been to Vatican City, you know, St. Peter's Basilica, St. Peter's Square, several floors down, if you will, into the ground, is Peter's body, his final resting place, the crypt of St. Peter the Apostle. So St. Peter's Square is named after him. Now, what's interesting about all of that, if you've ever been to Rome, you've seen this. There are keys everywhere. There are mosaics. They're in the floor. They're in the flag of the Vatican. In 1929, Pope Pius XI commissioned the papal flag. And he had the crossed keys to represent the authority given to the Pope, every subsequent Pope after Peter. If you were to look at Vatican, specifically St. Peter's Square, from the air, if you could get an aerial view of it, the whole thing is shaped like a key. The idea of keys are everywhere. They're door handles. They're used. The symbol of the key is everywhere in Rome because it's supposed to evoke our imagination of that authority that Jesus gave to Peter, who is considered the first pope. The last thing I want to say about this, and then I'll finish up. I'll end up here. Is every time a pope is elected, they're elected at a process called a conclave. So when a pope dies or when a pope resigns, there is a process where all the cardinals in the church come from wherever they are around the world, and they are locked in with a key into the Sistine Chapel. Okay, the Sistine Chapel is the famous one with the Michelangelo ceiling on it, okay, named after Pope Sixtus. That's why it's called the Sistine Chapel. They're locked in there with key. Conclave means with key. They're locked in with key, and they vote amongst themselves for one of themselves. And when one of them is chosen, they emerge as the new Peter with the new authority. What's the symbol of his authority? The key. So he emerges from the conclave with key. So that's why it's called a conclave. So every aspect of this is just riddled with keys, and again, to evoke that imagination and to remind us all of this authority that Christ gave, this earthly authority that Christ gave to Peter and to every subsequent bishop of Rome ever since then. So that's a lot, but I hope this has made sense. If you have friends that you think you might be interested in this, maybe people who are not Catholic, who never understood the idea of the papacy or why we're called Roman Catholics, please feel free to share this. I'd ask you, if you feel like it, to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Check us out on Facebook. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them. I hope you will continue to tune in to Fish on Fridays. Until next time, be good to each other, and God bless.